Have you ever found yourself reaching for your phone, a bottle, a stick of cigarettes, or maybe just binging a show just because you want to feel okay? Many people do this not just because they want to get high or they want to feel high, but because they want to feel better, they want to feel lighter, they want to feel like they are more in control of their lives. And this is something that happens to many of us, especially when life feels overwhelming, when we're going through a rough patch, or when it feels like so many things are happening in our lives and we're just down under. We don't just wake up addicted. Nobody chooses to be addicted. Nobody sets out a plan to end up being an addict. For many people, what started off as a craving, as a coping mechanism ends up being a craving. Maybe they just lost someone, they are dealing with grief, they are dealing with trauma, they are having a bad day, and so they reach for their phone, they bury themselves in work, only to find out that what they've turned to, the substance or the behavior that they've picked up, ends up being more than just a coping strategy or a coping mechanism. It ends up being something that controls them and controls their lives. And they end up finding out that what they started off with seemingly good intentions to feel better, to feel happier, to feel like they have certain emotions under control, ends up being the very thing that makes them potentially become an addict. So many people don't wake up, well, nobody wakes up feeling or desiring to become an addict. Who am I and why does this matter to me? My name is Ore, and I'm an addictions educator and wellness consultant. I have a background in medicine, in holistic mental health, and in addictions. I'm very passionate, I'm palpably passionate about helping individuals and the organizations that serve them to move toward true well-being. It is for this reason that in addition to the work that I already do, I started a nonprofit that's focused on helping immigrants and refugees live more mentally healthy. But aside my credentials, aside my titles, I have seen up close, I have seen firsthand how emotional pain pushes people towards addictions. But I've also seen how healing is possible with the right insight, support, and compassion. So what really is addiction? Because for the average person, when they hear the word addiction, what comes to their mind is cannabis, alcohol. For the typical, if I asked anyone at random, they would most likely mention alcohol, cannabis, before they go to behavioral addictions. And that's one of the things that I wanted to highlight. Addictions don't just happen with substances, they also happen with behaviors. And simply put, an addiction or addictions are compulsive behaviors or patterns of behavior, even if that very thing has caused very negative consequences. It's also when a person persistently uses a substance despite the fact that it has caused them a lot of harm in the past. So addictions don't just refer to substances that probably came to your mind when you heard the word. It also refers to behaviors. It refers to things that we already do, but do it because, in this case, sometimes people just want to drown out things that are already going on in their life that they would rather not deal with. And so addictions are not always visible or dramatic. If a person is addicted to a substance like cocaine, for example, it's very likely that you can tell. It's very likely that you can, when they are high or when a person is drunk or when a person is persistently drunk, chances are that you can tell because a drunken person isn't very quiet except they are asleep or passed out, right? You can usually tell from the way they behave. But there are patterns of behavior that are not as obvious, that many everyday people are struggling with. For example, social media addiction. That's one that I think is going to be very much more prevalent than it already is in the coming future. Many people pick up their phones not just because they are interested in what the people on their timeline have to say. For a lot of people, they just want to drown out the noise from their own life. They are not happy with certain things happening to them. They just want to distract themselves. So for a lot of people, they pick up their phones every day to distract themselves, not because they're very interested in the people that are going to show up on their feed. We also have work addiction. For a lot of people, it's one of those things that comes off as very noble and very commendable. Many people are probably even awarded for it as well. But sometimes, if we dig a little deeper, many people are immersed in their work the way that they are because they're trying to ignore or avoid so many things happening in their life. So there are many other things. There are many other things like porn addiction that you probably have heard of. There are so many other things that happen, not because people just decided to become reckless, right? Sometimes people were just looking for a way to cope with the complexities of their life. And so it goes, like I said, it goes beyond drugs, it goes beyond substances, it also includes behaviors. And sometimes, not every time, but sometimes it just starts as someone trying to regulate or manage or cope with the things going on in their life. So a common root, for the sake of my presentation today, there are many causes of addictions, and there's genetics, there are many things as well. But for the context of my presentation today, I'm going to look at the common root of pain, because I believe, and I have also seen it play out in so many people's, even people who had a genetic predisposition, even people who made so many seemingly wrong choices. For a lot of people, a common denominator is that they were trying to run away from pain. They were trying to escape it. They were trying to feel better. They were trying to feel like they are more in control of some part of their life, you know, especially when on the inside, everything feels like it's all over the place. So a common root is pain, powerlessness, and the need to feel in control. Many addictions stem from emotional pain. Many addictions start. I spoke to someone very recently who, quite frankly, admitted that he ended up having a DUI and becoming addicted to a certain substance after he heard about the passing of his grandma. Now, this was someone that meant a lot to him. This is someone who was not a very young person. He had gone through his life without dealing with this. But then he heard about the passing of someone that meant so much to him, and the only way that he thought he could deal with it was not to speak to someone, was not to have a conversation, was not to even simply cry, was to go to a substance, and it ended up leading to a DUI. And so that's something that happens for a lot of seemingly responsible, upright, kind, everyday people like you and me. They are dealing with things that are breaking their heart. They are dealing with things that keep them up at night. And so they pick up their phone, their substance, a pack of cigarettes, and the likes. So many addictions stem from emotional pain, grief, trauma, rejection, shame. Shame is one of those very strong emotions that can cripple a person. It doesn't just prevent a person from moving forward or being productive. It can also cripple a person and make them feel like so many things are not worth it. They might as well drown their sorrows with a bottle of alcohol. The need for control often grows from feeling unsafe or powerless, especially if a person is a victim of trauma, for example, or they were raped, for example. You know, there are certain things that happen to a person that make them feel inherently powerless. There are some things that are more significant than others, and people feel like the only way they can feel a sense of control is if they turn to a substance. And so those are some of the reasons why, even though many people on the outside appear like addicts, or they appear like people who don't seem to know what they want, or, you know, they've faced a lot of judgment, sometimes they're just dealing with emotions that they would rather not talk about. And I'm going to use this point to also call for more empathy, because this is something I'm very passionate about. Addictions are not always because of a moral failure. They're not always because people just were facing peer pressure. Even with youths, even with teenagers, sometimes they're dealing with so many things happening in their parents' lives, in the life of their loved ones, happening in school, for example. Many people are bullied and they feel like the only way that they can deal with it is to pick up a substance. It's not just because they're trying to feel among. So I'm also using this point to call for more empathy. The next time you see someone who seems to be an addict or who seems to be relying or dependent on a substance or constantly going back to a behavior, despite, even if it's gambling, for example, despite all the things that they seem to have lost, I want to call for more empathy. So instead of saying, why are you like this, for example, it would be more empathetic and far more appropriate to say what happened to you or what's going on in your life, what's going on in your heart, what's going on in your mind. Chances are, if they are comfortable enough to be honest, they would tell you something that would sincerely make you move from judgment to more empathy and compassion. And so what a lot of people are really looking for isn't to just make a bad decision or to just make a wreck of things or to lose their marriage or to lose money or to end up homeless or to lose their job. That's not what the average person doesn't wake up and say, hey, today I'm going to lose my job. Today I'm going to become an addict. The average person doesn't do that. Or I'm going to lose my marriage, I'm going to lose my kids. The average person doesn't wake up with that resolve. What people are usually looking for, like I mentioned, is a semblance of peace. It may not be true peace. It may just be the illusion of peace, but it's a semblance of peace. And in that brief period of time, it's enough for them. That's what they think. So one thing people are looking for is usually a semblance of peace. Sometimes they're looking for a connection that they're missing. If a person just dealt with a breakup, I've heard people laugh at people who make very seemingly rash decisions when they go through a breakup or when, it seems like a relationship ended. Many people think it's not that serious, but many people have taken very drastic decisions because of the pain that came from that breakup. And so sometimes one of the decisions people make is to turn to a substance or start engaging in a behavior, right? And so even if a person lost someone, for example, like the story I mentioned, even if a person lost someone, sometimes they just want to feel something. They just want to feel something. They feel numb, they just want to feel something. A sense of identity, safety, or control. This is also very common with teenagers. This is also very common with someone that's dealing with bullying, someone dealing with identity issues, someone hiding many things going on their inside. Sometimes these addictions that people end up engaging with is because they just want to feel a sense of identity. They want to feel safe. At the end of the day, they end up sometimes too late finding out that what they thought would give them warmth and safety is the very thing that ends up exposing them. But in the moment that they feel that pain, they don't think, that's not what they think, that's not what's coming to their mind. So another reason why people turn to addictions is because of the weight of an emotional overload. They feel overwhelmed, they feel heavy-hearted, they feel heavy-laden. And so sometimes these are some of the reasons why people turn to addictions. And even though in many cases people have tasted the negative impact of the substance or the behavior that they are now addicted to, they still keep going back to it because a part of their brain remembers the temporary relief that they felt. So if it was a distraction, if it was some form of joy, if that was the first time, some people the first time that they had a laugh in weeks is after 7 bottles of alcohol. So a part of their brain remembers that. A part of their brain tells them that this is when we last felt this joy, this emotion. And so they go back to the substance or the behavior. And so this is a common pattern. Based on the things that I've been saying, I just put this pattern to help us, because I'm a visual person, and if there's anyone like me, you probably remember things in pictures. So this pattern is something that happens a lot. A person feels pain, they turn to a behavior because they feel like it would help them cope. It's a coping strategy even if it's just for a brief period of time. And then it gives them some form of relief. It may not be holistic. It may not be good for them. It may not be good for their finances. It may not be good for their homes, but it gives them some form of relief in the moment. And then after a period of time, when people feel, a little bit more stable or balanced, sometimes they end up feeling guilt or shame. And that leads to the beginning of the cycle again, which is pain. And sometimes the temporary relief also makes people keep going back. So sometimes they skip the guilt or shame part and they just keep going back to the coping behavior because their brain tells them this is how to feel better. This is what worked the last time. And so let's look at what actually works, right? Because we've looked at what people think works when they are dealing with emotional pain that ultimately leads to them becoming addicts. So let's look at what actually works. And so the first thing in this context is self-awareness and self-expression. So if you are dealing with, as long as we're on earth, chances are you're going to have a bad day every now and then. Something painful is going to happen. I don't think any of us is immune to that, right? And so one very key step in dealing with this, before it escalates before it snowballs into something much bigger and life-altering, is to be self-aware and to express yourself. Simple things. I preach the gospel of journaling all the time. I truly believe journaling is very cathartic, it's very therapeutic. It's helped me personally so many times. I've seen it help people, even dealing with some very dark things. And so I would recommend journaling. But if you're not a writer, if you don't like writing, speaking is also an option, typing. There are many mediums of self-expression. Some people also draw. I draw a little bit. I wouldn't show you because I'm not very proud of my drawings, but I draw sometimes. And some people also paint. There are different mediums of self-expression that people can pick up. There's also a need for early intervention, particularly for youths or teenagers who sometimes struggle with speaking up quickly enough, right? And instead of shame that even if you've turned to a behavior or you've turned to a substance because of whatever is happening in your life, it's important to always remember that shame is pointless if it doesn't lead to any change. Wallowing in shame only leaves you in a pit of despair. It doesn't really move anyone forward. It seems pious, but it doesn't really move anyone forward. So the next step would be, instead of feeling shame, it would be to get someone you can speak to, seek connection. If it's a therapist, if it's a loved one, a friend, even if you don't feel safe enough to have the conversation with an adult in your life, you can have the conversation with a friend, a trusted friend who is better, in that area than you, not someone who's going to drag you down further. And also healthy, supportive community. This is also very important. This can happen in support groups. This can happen in if you're a person of faith, in faith circles. This can happen in your neighborhood, with your neighbors, with your aunties, your uncles, your loved ones, in the park, if you made a friend, if you're friendly, things like that. They seem very little, but they snowball into something much bigger. And then there's the very important point of trauma-informed care. So you can get this with therapy as well, a trauma-informed therapist, a trauma-informed professional with addictions, and someone who is essentially trained in trauma-informed care would really go a long way in helping you before things spiral into a more devastating place. Then culturally sensitive, holistic approaches that don't just look at you from the lens of what you're dealing with and what your response is, but the cause of your response, right? So that's very important, because it's also very important for us to always remember that when we turn to addictions because of pain or because of despair, there's a need to focus more on the root, which is the pain, as opposed to the addiction, because focusing on the addiction doesn't stop the root, and it's going to come back. And so what you can do, because you might be listening to me and you have a loved one who's struggling with an addiction, you're not even sure what the cause is, or you just have a friend or you just want to, you just want to know, or you're a parent who has a child who is struggling, or you have a friend or a sibling, or you just know anyone random, or anyone or in the future, you might meet people who are struggling. So what you can do, even if you're not a professional, is to be a safe space and not someone who always projects shame. It's important. This seems very simple, but it's actually very important to be the kind of person that people can talk to. Even if you don't know the right things to say, you don't have the terminologies, it's important to emphasize this, because many people attempt to open up to someone they think could be of help to them, but they end up regretting it because of the person's response. So it's very important to be the kind of person that people feel safer. Even if you don't give them a 10-step agenda for how to get better, at least they feel safer and lighter speaking to you. And it's important to ask better questions. I mentioned this earlier. It's very important because sometimes out of frustration, especially if you're the carer or the loved one of someone who is struggling, it's very possible, and chances are high, that you will get frustrated at certain points and yell or say the wrong things like, why are you like this? But a better question would be, what do you need right now? How can I help you? Things like that, right? And sometimes, like I said, simply holding space for people is enough in that moment, as opposed to fixing or trying to fix, especially if the person hasn't already gotten to a point where they're already addicted to something, right? Even if they're just in a space where they're contemplating, or they're weighing their options, or they're just, everybody has, like I said, everybody has bad days. So even if someone is just having a bad day, it's important to, first of all, hold space for them before trying to fix anything. Then also support people's healthy boundaries. Ensure that everywhere you are, in your home, in your conversations, online, any space that you have some power or control over, it's important that you also advocate for emotional literacy, because many people sincerely do not know. They are very sincere in their emotions, but it's very misguided. They don't know that what they're saying is going to push the other person down the drain. And also, it's important to encourage access to therapy, community, and cultural appropriate care in any circle that you're in. If somebody you know is struggling, suggest therapy to them. Even if they say no, just try and suggest it. Suggest help, suggest a support group, suggest something that you know would help them move forward. Don't just look at them and judge. And lastly, I'm going to end with this. Addiction doesn't have to be a life sentence. It doesn't have to be a dead end. A lot of the times, like I mentioned earlier, it's just a signal. It's just a flashing red light saying something is going on deep here, something is going on here, something needs attention, something needs care, something is happening, right? So it doesn't mean that a person is broken. It doesn't mean that a person cannot recover, cannot be redeemed. And so a lot of the times, it's important to look at it from this lens, because that mindset would help you have more empathy. And survival isn't the end of the story, even though a lot of people turn to these behaviors and substances because they're just trying to survive. It's not the end of the story, and healing is possible with compassion, understanding, and support. Thank you for your time.